Hello and welcome to the third Glyphs tutorial video where I'm going to talk about setting up a variable font file. So in the last video I went through how do you set up your vertical metrics, and you'll notice that this is exactly the same file as we were working on last time, and this will be generally how we're going to set up the variable font file using the same metrics as I worked on with this sketch right here. But I don't need that sketch open right now. I only need that one we're going to be drawing, and we're not going to be drawing in this video. We're just going to be setting up the file. Now, you're probably wondering, what exactly does a variable font file look like in regards to a working file? So a variable font file, obviously, we talked about on the first class in the variable fonts lecture, where I talked about how a variable font is one font file that behaves like many font files. That's really a quote from John Hudson, the type designer on Gabriola Island in BC, Canada. And really it's a great description because that's exactly really what a variable font file is in a very basic level. And then you have to ask yourself, well, if that's the case, how do we actually build a variable font file? And what we need to do is we actually need to build a working file that has multiple master designs. Now, a master design is something that we saw in the font info. So in the font info, remember when we were working on the metrics, I talked about in the last video and also in video number 1 that we can add multiple master designs, and it's going to make a lot more sense what a master is and what it means to say we're working with a multiple master workflow. Because what it essentially means is that the more masters I have in here, they're individual designs or drawing spaces that relate, however, to one another. Now they relate to each other in terms of their vertical metrics, to their UPM grid, it has to be consistent. The name will change so that we can define what each of those masters are, and these axes coordinates will change as well. And it depends on what kind of a variable font I'm doing. Right now we'll set up just a basic variable font for width, but I will show you how you could add multiple axis coordinates, or axis parameters I think is better. The coordinates really refer to these coordinates that you see right here, that you can enter in here. Right now 100 is just the default for weight. Weight is also just a default in there. But these would be the coordinates. And what we need to do to set up a variable font file is we need to have at least 2 masters present in the file. And I'm going to show you 2 variable font files so that you get an idea of what a variable font file would look like. The first one here is a typeface I'm working on right now. And it's a sans serif typeface design. But what you notice about this file is that you see in the same glyphs file I have a very light design, I have a regular design, I have a bold design, a super bold design, condensed, and extended. And I'm doing this across all of the letters of the alphabet. At the current stage of this variable font right now, this is just a concept file, so I haven't actually implemented everything for every character. Right now I'm just trying to build something of a design space to give an indication to the person that I'm working with on the project what this typeface is going to generally look like when I actually extrapolate it to everything. So right now this is just a concept sketch. Emojis as well. By the way, you can get emojis in there. However, we're not going to do that today in this video. But this is generally what a variable font would look like in terms of its visuals. However, I actually have to have multiple masters. Now you see these 6 tabs right here actually represent a different master. And if I go into a new oh, it opened up the smiley or the surprise face. If I go into a new file, because I don't want to mess up this window that I'm working on, there's a specific reason I have these characters typed out this way for testing strings and designing, which we'll touch on later. But when I'm working on this, I can have my letter N here. Now if I cycle through these tabs, I'm actually going through the different master designs in the design space. Same thing for lowercase a. Go backwards. This is extended, condensed, super bold, bold, regular or normal. Personally, I like to call the regular weight normal in a variable font, because as we touched on in the variable fonts lecture, how do we refer to things like semi-bold now and medium now that we're dealing with all these arbitrary instances in between something? Okay, so this is my design space, and this is what it would look like when I'm drawing inside. These are the Bezier points for all of these characters. By the way, holding spacebar previews a drawing that you've done. Okay, but I can't show you that up here because you can only do it by pressing spacebar. Or you could do fill preview, and you can work on your typeface that way, but that's for another video. Sorry to get off track. That's what a variable font file looks like on the surface, but when I go into my file, I have to have a few things set up. I have to, inside my font area, my font info, the first tab that says font, custom parameter, I have to have an axis property defined. And right now in this typeface, I have a weight and a width property defined. And I'll touch on why you have to have this code associated with these parameters. These are defaults, they have to be this way. So we will set that up together and I'll take you through that. But once you have those defined, if you go into your masters tab, I have 6 masters here that I'm working on that you see inside the Glyph working file. So everything that I see here is represented here because I need to be able to cycle through these masters. And what you'll notice about these different masters is look at what happens to the weight value, for instance. Thin is 100, weight normal is 400, bold is 600, ultra bold is 900, condensed will take 400 as its default weight, but it changes in width. It has to be 50 because it needs to be less than what is normal, which is 100. And extended, 400 is the normal weight, but it has to be 150. Now these values, there are specified values that you do have to choose for a variable font, and what they are is they are registered access tags with specific values associated with them. So basically, weight has to be essentially anything above 0 and less than 1,000. So generally what a lot of type designers, at least I tend to go by the Adobe variable font prototype and spec on GitHub, and what they tend to specify is they actually, with their prototype fonts, they go between really 200 and 900. I'm going between 100 and 900 in weight because it gives me a little bit more range and flexibility to control things. I could easily work between 200 for the thin and 900 for the weight. Okay. Now I want you to notice something else. Look at the X height value. Watch as I go between thin and normal, it does not change. But as I go from normal to bold, the X height changes by 10 units. Okay? And then of course it goes back down because condensed and extended should be sort of at a normal state. Now the reason that I do that is because when you're developing a typeface for bold weights, and especially if I'm going from very thin to very bold, what ends up having to happen is that as I'm making a letter form really bold, I'm taking away a ton of counter space as I get to something this bold. So what makes a typeface really bold is actually, it's a thickening of the stroke, but what you're really doing is you're actually taking away interior space. Because look at normal. Look at all the counter space inside this shape. Look at the reduction of counter space as I move towards here. Reducing constantly as I get to here. So that's what's happening in terms of the horizontal space, but also because I'm taking away counter space, I'm running out of room to actually work with the counter, so I need to add a little bit of extra size or height to the X height in a bold character like this so that I have a bit more room to work with. So that's why you would see that. Okay, another typeface. This typeface is really just a prototype right now. I haven't moved very far with it, but it's a 4-master variable font with a weight axis. Okay, so if I go into that font, you see 4 masters. They only have a weight property. Right now I've gone from 0 to 1,000. That works for the sake of demonstration, but in terms of the final exported file, really 0 wouldn't be recognized. You'd have to enter at least 1. So you'd actually have to be like this. And you probably have to be technically working like this. But it works for the sake of demo. And, sorry, if I go into font, what I see here is just a weight axis variable and value. Under weight, though, so notice here I can choose between these default registered axes. So in the variable font spec, which Microsoft, Adobe, Apple, I believe Google is in on this as well, as part of this spec. The default axis tags that are registered right now are weight, width, italic, which is like an italic slant, optical size, whoops, and slant, which is it's basically the same thing as italic. They're not that much different. But you notice this little grayed out abbreviation to the right. This is the actual axis tag, and this is going to be very necessary when we go and start testing your variable font. When you work with a variable font in CSS, you have to enter the axis tag, which is actually OPSZ for optical size, or weight, which is WGHT. You have to enter those tags in order for in CSS for you to enter any values to work with a variable font. So these have to be here, they have to be lowercase. Custom axis tags, though, it's recommended that you use all caps and only 4 letters. So to make a custom one, I would go in here and I would say height, let's say. I want my letters to grow in height. And what I would do, though, is I would make up a custom value here. And I could say this. And then it would give me a height parameter, but then in my CSS, I would have to enter this case sensitive, capital H, G, H, T. But I'm going to delete that. And I delete it by just selecting it and getting rid of it. Okay. Now what happens with a variable font, remember our preview window that we saw in video number 1, which you're probably looking at it like this right now and not blurred. So I'll unblur it. In order for me to flip it to be white characters on black background, I just click this button. What I'm going to do is we're going to download a script in a future video, but I'm just going to show you with a script that's called OpenType Variations Player. So basically with a variable font, when everything is set up properly, this script's just going to take a second to open up a user interface. This is a Python script. You can use Python to write scripts to build user interface tools inside Glyphs, or FontLab 6, or a RoboFont. And my apologies for how long it's taking, but I'll just talk while the color wheel spins. Basically, what will happen inside a variable font file is that when I'm working on it, I've set up my masters so that it goes along a continuum. So if I play this, watch what happens to these characters. And they're moving a little bit slower in the center. That's fine. I'm going to speed this up a little bit. Just going to play a little bit faster now. But notice what's happening is that right now this is cycling between the bold and the very light in the typeface. But what you're noticing is that some parts of it are actually moving slow. Like it's actually moving slower here. Then it goes quick as it gets to the bold. Now I've done that on purpose. What I've done is I've told these masters with my integers and the weight values. Between light and regular, it's a pretty short distance. Regular right now is 200, so it's about 199, 198 away. But between regular and bold, it goes from 200 to 600, And that's because I don't need the weight properties, or let's say the design, to change very much between regular and bold. So I give it a longer interpolation space. However, between bold and ultra bold, it doesn't have a lot of room to grow, but I want that on purpose because if this bold master, so if I go here and I select, let's type 2 characters and let's get ultra bold and bold. By the way, the layers palette allow you to select your masters individually so that you can work with them separately inside here. So notice how with the G, I've got 2 Gs open. I could open up another G and select the light one and look at them all and edit them all at the same time. It's pretty handy. However, let's just focus on these two. If I was to interpolate this shape, this G shape, or actually, you know what? Apologies to backtrack, but let's actually get the A's because the A is a complex character that has a lot of counter space being taken away from it as it gets to be very bold, and even as it progresses along the continuum here. So that's regular, this is light. So notice between light and regular, not a lot of the counter space really gets taken away in this character. So it can migrate from here to here without the design needing to change very much. Meaning the shaping, the stylization of the regular does not need to change much. However, as I get closer to bold, notice how this stroke right here starts to taper more than this stroke entry into the stem. Just remember the writing movement is like this. This doesn't change too much, but as I go from this character to this character, things change a lot. This stroke is a lot thinner than the width of this stroke. And that's part of the effect of this super bold character. However, that's why I need to have less space, let's say a smaller integer growth between these two characters than I need between these two, because they don't change that much. Now, another thing that I could do if I wanted to really control this step between this step, and I couldn't, let's say, change the integer, is I would make another master between these two to control the step in between. However, the more masters you add, the more work you're giving for yourself, so you have to be careful. Now you might ask yourself, well, Kevin, why can't I just have this? Technically, I could interpolate between the light and the bold. However, we're going to do a video that talks about working with interpolation, and I will touch on why we can't do that in that video. But essentially, it's for the same reasons I just explained. If I do that, I'm going to get some really weird looking stuff in the middle area between these. Let's say this is 0 and this is 1,000. There's going to be some really weird stuff happen in between here that is not desirable. So I do need to have control over my design space. So I'm going to close these down, and we're going to quickly I'm going to show you how to build your space. Now the first thing that you need to do for building a variable font is you need to go plus, make a new custom parameter, and you're going to go down and you're going to scroll down. So when you click on these arrow keys, you're going to scroll down to axes and you're going to click on that. And for today, let's just add a weight axis, because remember, you only have to work with one axis or variable font parameter set. So we'll work with weight. And when I add that, weight is active and it shows up in the master area. If I wanted to, I could add another parameter, and let's just go and add optical size and click OK. That adds optical size here, and it also puts optical size in here. But I'm going to delete that because I just don't want it to be confusing. Okay, now another few things that I recommend adding is I recommend adding what's called not a virtual master, but enforced compatibility check. This means, and I'm going to explain this in the multiple masters section, if I have multiple masters, my masters have to be drawn in a certain way where all the points are the same type of points and they are the same number of points across all these different masters. And in order to make sure that that doesn't have a breakdown, because I can't actually use my file properly if it will not interpolate if that does not exist. So enforced compatibility check, make sure that it won't let me export the file until everything is compatible across the masters. Okay, now variable font origin, we can't really do anything with this yet because we only have one master, but this would be, let's think about it this way. If I have a variable font and I can go between thin and ultra bold, I can actually tell the typeface when it's opened up by default what master should be the default master that people see when they load the font in InDesign or in any typical web or font reading platform or font menu platform. And generally most people will choose regular, but you could actually have it start at light or bold. That's an option. But for now we'll just start with regular. So I recommend having these things open. Now under master, right now I have regular, and what you want to do is first make sure that you have your metrics, your vertical metrics all set up first. Make sure you're happy with these values, because what you're going to do is you're going to go to the plus sign and you're going to duplicate the selected master. Now this works out really well also if you've drawn a bunch of characters. Let's say that you've drawn all of your characters in this light master. What would be a really great thing to do if that was the case is you could duplicate the master and it would actually copy all the outline data over to a duplicate master. So it would duplicate this one and you get another one. So let's make this one regular and we're going to call it 400 for the weight. And this one is going to be called bold for now, just for the sake of demonstration. And let's call it 600. Okay. Regular and bold. So now what's key is that I can actually develop a variable font like this. I could actually interpolate these two things. And I could make instances between them, but we won't do that right now. Also, if you go into the font window, now I have two masters. And notice in the layers palette right here that I've got regular and bold. Okay. So we have everything that we really need to get started. I can add a lot more masters, many more masters. However, I'm not going to do that in this video. I'm going to save that for the multiple master or working with interpolation video. Okay, so that's all for now.